Lila always said the beach house was her sanctuary. She described it as a little piece of heaven, tucked away from the noise and chaos of life. "It's magic," she'd tell me, her voice wistful. "You'll love it, Nathan. It's everything we need: peace, beauty, and time to just be us." Her parents had bought the house decades ago, a place to escape their hectic lives. For Lila, it became more than just a vacation spot. It was the backdrop to her childhood, a haven where she spent sun-soaked summers building sandcastles and chasing waves. Even as an adult, she returned whenever she needed to recharge. When she suggested we spend a week there, I didn't hesitate. Things between us had been tense for months. Conversations felt hollow, and the distance between us seemed to grow every day. The beach house sounded like a lifeline, a chance to reconnect and remember why we fell in love in the first place. The drive was long but beautiful, winding through rolling hills that gave way to glimpses of the ocean. As we got closer, Lila seemed to relax. She rolled down the window, letting the salty breeze tousle her hair. For the first time in weeks, I saw her smile, genuine and carefree. By the time we arrived, the house looked like something out of a dream. It perched on a bluff overlooking the endless expanse of ocean, its weathered blue shutters and wraparound porch bathed in golden sunlight. A hammock swayed gently between two tall palm trees, inviting us to sink into its embrace and forget the world. "This is it," Lila said, her voice soft with reverence. "It's beautiful," I replied, stepping out of the car and taking in the salty air mingled with the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. Inside, the house felt alive with memories. The air was filled with the faint scent of lavender and polished wood. Family photos lined the walls, capturing moments frozen in time. Lila as a child building sandcastles, her parents laughing under a striped umbrella, and a younger Lila holding a surfboard, her face glowing in the light of a setting sun. "It feels like home," I said softly, running my fingers over the edge of a well-worn dining table. "It is," she replied, slipping her hand into mine. "And for the next week, it's ours." For the first time in months, I let myself hope. The first few days felt like stepping into a dream. We fell into an effortless rhythm. Mornings sipping coffee on the porch as the ocean breeze wrapped around us. Afternoons swimming in the cool, crystal-clear water or lazing in the hammock, and evenings cooking together in the small but charming kitchen. Lila seemed lighter, more like the woman I'd fallen in love with, vibrant, carefree, and full of laughter. It was as if the weight we'd been carrying had lifted. Watching her, I caught myself thinking this trip might actually work. Maybe all we needed was time, space, and each other. But as the days passed, small things began to eat away at my contentment. Lila's phone buzzed constantly. Each time it did, her smile faltered, and she'd glance at the screen before setting it aside. When I asked who was texting her, she brushed it off. "Work stuff," she said breezily. "Nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe her. After all, this trip was supposed to be about reconnecting, rebuilding trust. But the doubt had been planted, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it grew. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, I stepped onto the porch to find Lila pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, hurried, and I couldn't help but strain to hear her words. "You can't just show up here," she hissed. "He'll know." "No, I'll figure it out. Just wait." Her words made my stomach churn. I stepped forward, and she froze, her face flushing as she ended the call abruptly. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. "Work," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "A last-minute crisis." "It didn't sound like work," I replied, watching her closely. She rolled her eyes, her smile tightening. "Nathan, don't start. Let's not ruin this trip with paranoia." I wanted to believe her. For years, Lila had been my partner, my rock. But something about her tone, her posture, the way she avoided my gaze, it didn't sit right. The next day, she suggested we visit a nearby town. "It's charming," she said, her enthusiasm almost over the top. "Cobblestone streets, cute shops, amazing seafood. You'll love it." I agreed. hoping the change of scenery might ease the tension. The town was exactly as she described, quaint and picturesque, with brightly painted storefronts and the smell of fresh bread wafting from every corner. Lila dragged me into boutique after boutique, chattering excitedly about everything from handmade jewelry to artisanal soaps. But even as she laughed and smiled, her phone never left her hand. By the time we sat down for lunch, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Who keeps texting you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "No one," she said quickly, too quickly. "It's nothing." "It doesn't seem like nothing," I pressed, my patience wearing thin. She sighed, her smile faltering. "Nathan, please. Can we not do this right now?" Her deflection stung, but I let it drop. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the waves, I tried one last time to bridge the growing distance between us. "Lila," I began, "I know things have been hard lately. I just want to understand how we got here." She turned to me, her expression softening. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I feel like we've been drifting, and I don't know how to fix it." I reached for her hand, relieved by her honesty. "We can fix this," I said. "We just need to be honest with each other." She nodded, but something in her eyes held back. That night, I lay awake, the sound of the ocean failing to soothe the unease growing in my chest. Lila slept beside me, her breathing soft and even, but I felt more alone than ever. When her phone buzzed on the nightstand, I froze. The sound was jarring in the stillness. I stared at it, the screen lighting up briefly before fading into darkness. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, got the better of me. Carefully, I reached for her phone, my heart pounding as I unlocked it. The messages I found turned my blood to ice. The messages on Lila's phone blurred as I stared at the screen. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Each line was more damning than the last. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable. I miss you. It's hard pretending when he's around. Be careful tomorrow. Don't let him catch on." The words hit me like a freight train. My pulse pounded in my ears as my world seemed to tilt. The realization of betrayal, as sharp and cold as steel, pierced through me. I put the phone down carefully, almost reverently, as if it might explode. My hands trembled, and I clenched them into fists to steady myself. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't draw a full breath. I stared at Lila as she slept beside me, her face peaceful and serene, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. How could she? How could the woman I'd built my life with, the woman I trusted implicitly, do this to me? My mind reeled with questions, each one more painful than the last. The urge to shake her awake, to confront her, was overwhelming. But something held me back. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was the faint hope that there was some kind of explanation. Or maybe it was cowardice. Instead, I got up, careful not to wake her, and made my way to the porch. The night air was cold against my skin, the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore doing little to calm the turmoil in my chest. I sat down heavily in one of the wooden chairs, my mind racing. Who was it? Was it someone I knew? How long had this been going on? The text didn't offer answers, only more questions. The next morning, I was quieter than usual, the weight of the night's discovery hanging over me like a dark cloud. Lila noticed, of course. "You're not eating much," she said, her tone casual, though her eyes flicked toward me with something like concern. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Just tired. Didn't sleep well." Her lips twitched as if she wanted to say more, but she let it drop. Eleanor called from the kitchen, asking for help with breakfast. Lila rose quickly, grabbing plates from the table. "I'll help her," she said, her voice a little too eager. I watched her go, my thoughts a whirlwind. The woman I loved was a stranger to me now, and I had no idea what to do about it. The day dragged on. Lila suggested we go for a walk along the beach, and I agreed, desperate for normalcy, or at least the illusion of it. She slipped her hand into mine as we strolled along the shoreline, her fingers warm against my skin. It felt like a cruel joke, this intimacy, when I knew what she was hiding. "You've been quiet today," she said, glancing at me. "Is something bothering you?" I hesitated, the urge to confront her warring with the need to gather more information. Finally, I shook my head. Just thinking about work. It's been on my mind lately. She nodded, though her gaze lingered on me, her brow furrowing slightly. You know this trip is supposed to be about leaving all that behind, right? Just us? The irony of her words was almost too much to bear. I forced a smile, squeezing her hand. I know. You're right. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the texts replayed in my mind, each one another dagger twisting in my chest. I needed to know more. My gut told me the betrayal ran deeper than I'd realized, and I couldn't let it go until I had the full picture. Waiting until Lila was fast asleep, I slipped out of bed and retrieved her phone from the nightstand. My hands shook as I unlocked it, the soft glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. This time, I dug deeper. The messages weren't just from one person. They were from several. Each thread painted a damning picture of a woman I barely recognized. Plans to meet, exchanges of affection, even inside jokes I couldn't understand. And then there was a name that made my blood run cold. Looking forward to our next session, darling. Same time tomorrow. The sender was someone we both knew, someone I considered a friend. The next morning, my anger simmered just below the surface. Lila chatted breezily over breakfast, completely oblivious to the fact that her double life was beginning to unravel. I excused myself early, claiming I wanted to take a walk. Instead, I headed to the garage, where her phone logs had revealed she often went when she was on her work calls. The space was neat, almost suspiciously so. A folding chair sat in the corner, facing a window that overlooked the beach. I walked over to it, my breath hitching when I noticed a familiar scent, cologne. It wasn't mine. My gaze landed on a small bag tucked behind the chair. Opening it, I found items that made my stomach churn. A men's watch, a half-empty bottle of whiskey, and a note scrawled in a handwriting I didn't recognize. When I returned to the house, Lila was waiting for me on the porch. Her face lit up with a smile, though it faltered slightly when she saw my expression. "Everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head. I forced myself to smile, though my chest felt like it was about to burst. "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "Just needed some air." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "We should do something fun today," she said, her tone bright. "Maybe go kayaking?" "Sure," I replied, though my mind was elsewhere. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the waves, I made a decision. I couldn't let this go on any longer. The truth was out there, and I was going to uncover all of it. "Lila," I began, my voice steady, "is there anything you want to tell me?" She turned to me, her brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. Finally, I shook my head. "Never mind." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she nodded, turning back to the ocean. Inside, my resolve hardened. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence of the night felt unbearable, pressing down on me as I lay in bed. My mind was consumed by a whirlwind of thoughts I couldn't control. The texts I had seen earlier replayed in my mind, each one more damning than the last. Lila slept soundly beside me, her face serene, as if she had no care in the world. I stared at her, unable to reconcile the woman I had loved with the person who had betrayed me. Her peaceful expression felt like a slap in the face, a cruel reminder of the life she had built in secret, hidden from me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thick, oppressive. After what felt like an eternity, I slipped out of bed and made my way to the porch. The night air was cold, stinging against my skin as I stepped outside. The stars above were scattered like pinpricks of light in the vast darkness, but their beauty did nothing to calm me. I sat down heavily in one of the wooden chairs, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Every thought led to more questions. Who was she texting? Was it just one person, or were there more? And how long had this been going on? The answer to that last question scared me the most. Had I been blind for years? By morning, I had resolved to get answers. I couldn't live with the uncertainty gnawing at me. Over breakfast, I suggested that Lila and I spend the day apart. "I thought I'd head into town," I said, keeping my tone casual. Maybe check out that little bookstore we passed on the way in. Lila smiled, her demeanor as breezy as ever. That sounds nice, she said. I think I'll stay here and catch up on some reading. Maybe take a walk on the beach. Her nonchalance grated on me. How could she be so calm, so composed, knowing what she had done? But I forced a smile and nodded. Sounds like a plan. I didn't go into town. Instead, I drove a short distance down the road and parked at an overlook that gave me a clear view of the beach house. From there, I waited. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. My nerves felt frayed, my body coiled tight with tension. I was just about to give up when I saw him. A man emerged from the trees at the edge of the property. Even from a distance, I recognized him instantly. My stomach dropped, and a wave of nausea rolled over me. It was Albert. Albert, who had been my friend for years. Albert, who had stood beside me at my wedding. Albert, who I had trusted implicitly. I watched as he strode confidently up to the house, his posture relaxed, like he belonged there. He didn't knock. Instead, he opened the door and stepped inside as though it were his own home. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as anger bubbled up inside me. My breathing grew shallow, my chest tight. This wasn't just some stranger. This was someone I knew, someone I had trusted. Before I knew what I was doing, I had started the car. The drive back to the house was a blur, my thoughts consumed by a single, fiery need for confrontation. When I arrived, the house looked deceptively serene, bathed in the golden light of mid-morning. But I knew better. The living room was empty when I entered, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. The kitchen was silent, and the hallway leading to the bedrooms was eerily still. My heart pounded as I approached the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices inside. I pushed the door open without hesitation. The scene before me confirmed my worst fears. Albert was sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand resting lightly on Lila's knee. She sat beside him, her face turned toward his as they spoke in hushed tones. They both froze when they saw me, their expressions shifting instantly, Lila's to one of guilt and shock, Albert's to something closer to irritation. What the hell is going on here? I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Lila jumped to her feet, her face pale. Nathan, it's not what it looks like, she stammered. Albert, however, didn't bother to move. He leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. Calm down, Nate, he said, his tone maddeningly casual. You're overreacting. Overreacting? I repeated, my voice rising. You're in my house with my wife, and I'm overreacting? Lila stepped forward, her hands raised as if to placate me. Nathan, please, she said, her voice trembling. Let me explain. Explain? I spat. What could you possibly say that would make this okay? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I turned to Albert, my fists clenched at my sides. How long? I demanded. How long has this been going on? Albert finally stood, his expression hardening. That's none of your business, he said coldly. The hell it isn't. I shouted, my voice echoing in the small room. The tension in the room was suffocating. Lila sobbed quietly, her head in her hands, while Albert stood rigid, his jaw clenched. Get out, I said finally, my voice low but firm. Nathan, Lila began, but I cut her off. Both of you, get out of my house. Albert hesitated, but eventually, he grabbed his jacket and walked toward the door. Lila followed, casting one last, tearful glance at me before disappearing down the hallway. The silence that followed their departure was deafening. I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the space they had just vacated. The enormity of what had just happened began to sink in, and my legs felt weak. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. My mind raced, replaying the confrontation over and over. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It was too much to process. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I couldn't stay in that room, surrounded by the remnants of what I thought was a happy marriage. I spent the rest of the day walking along the beach. The salty breeze and the rhythmic sound of the waves were poor comfort, but they were better than the suffocating silence of the house. As the sun began to set, I found myself back at the house. It stood silent and empty, its charm now feeling like a cruel mockery. I made myself a drink and sat on the porch, staring out at the darkening horizon. The pain in my chest was unbearable, a hollow ache that seemed to echo the loss of everything I thought I had. For the first time, I let myself cry. The emptiness of the beach house was both a balm and a torment. With Albert and Lila gone, the suffocating tension that had hung over every interaction vanished, but in its place was a silence that pressed heavily on me. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of the wind through the shutters, carried echoes of their betrayal. The walls seemed to whisper reminders of their deceit. I moved through the house like a ghost, my steps aimless, my thoughts tangled. The life I thought I knew, the marriage I had trusted, was gone, shattered by secrets I never imagined could exist. The days began to blur together. I woke early, more out of habit than purpose, and spent hours staring at the ocean. Its vastness mocked me, its endless rhythm a cruel reminder of time moving forward, indifferent to my pain. At first, I tried to distract myself. I walked along the shore until my legs ached, the wet sand sucking at my feet with each step. I collected driftwood and seashells, not because I needed them, but because the task kept my hands busy. Still, the thoughts always crept back in. How long had it been going on? Did she ever feel guilty? And Albert, did he ever look me in the eye and feel even a shred of shame? One afternoon, while rummaging through the kitchen cabinets in search of something to eat, I stumbled across a notebook shoved into a drawer. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, and when I opened it, I realized it was Lila's journal. I hesitated, the weight of it heavy in my hands. Did I really want to read it? The answers might bring clarity, but they could just as easily deepen the wounds. Still, I couldn't resist. The first entries were harmless enough. She wrote about the beauty of the beach, the peace she found in the sound of the waves, and the joy of returning to the house that had been her sanctuary since childhood. But as I flipped further, the tone shifted. I feel alive when I'm with him, one entry read. It's wrong and I know it. But with Albert, everything feels easier. My stomach turned as I read the words. She didn't bother to mask her feelings, didn't try to justify them. Instead, she wrote with raw honesty, her emotions laid bare on the page. Nathan doesn't deserve this, another entry said. But I can't stop. I tell myself it's the last time, but then I see him, and I'm lost all over again. I slammed the notebook shut, my hands trembling. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the dark expanse of the ocean. The waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, their relentless sound filling the emptiness around me. I thought about leaving the beach house, abandoning it and all the memories it held. But something rooted me to the spot. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the faint hope that staying would help me make sense of everything. The next morning, I decided I couldn't live in the shadow of their betrayal any longer. If this house had been Lila's sanctuary, it would now become mine. I started small. I fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, replaced the broken porch light, and cleared out the clutter that had accumulated over the years. Each task felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a step toward rebuilding what had been broken. As I worked, the house began to feel less oppressive. The memories of Lila and Albert no longer suffocated me. Instead, the space became a blank canvas, a place where I could start anew. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, I found an old box labeled Memories. Inside were photographs, letters, and mementos from Lila's childhood. I sifted through them carefully, each item a reminder of the woman I had loved and the life we had shared. At the bottom of the box was an envelope addressed to me. I hesitated before opening it, my heart pounding in my chest. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, the letters slanting slightly to the right. Nathan, if you're reading this, it means I've left. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to tell you this in person, but you deserve the truth. I never stopped loving you. What I did was unforgivable, and I don't expect you to understand or forgive me. But please, don't let this destroy you. You're stronger than you think, and you deserve so much more than I could ever give you. Lila, asterisk asterisk. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I read the letter over and over, searching for something. An explanation, a reason, anything to help me make sense of what had happened. The letter didn't absolve her, but it gave me something I hadn't expected, a sense of closure. Lila was gone, and with her went the life we had built together. It was time to let go. I spent the next few days packing up her belongings. Each item was a bittersweet reminder of what we had shared and what we had lost. The act of boxing up her things felt cathartic, like I was clearing space for something new. By the end of the week, the house felt different. The heaviness that had lingered in the air was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. One morning, as I stood on the porch watching the sunrise, I felt a strange sense of peace. The hurt was still there, but it no longer consumed me. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine a future, one that didn't include Lila or Albert. The beach house, once a symbol of betrayal, had become a place of healing. And as I took a deep breath of the salty air, I knew I was ready to move forward. The beach house felt different now. Its walls no longer suffocated me, and the rhythmic sound of waves brought a measure of solace I hadn't thought possible. But the pain of betrayal wasn't something that simply vanished. It lingered, like a dull ache that flared with the wrong thought or memory. I began to reflect on what came next. Staying in this house forever wasn't an option. As much as it had become a refuge, it was still tied to the life I was trying to leave behind. One morning, as I was sipping coffee on the porch, my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered it anyway. Hello? Nathan, it's Eleanor. Eleanor was Albert's sister, a kind, no-nonsense woman I'd always admired. Her voice was steady, but there was a tension beneath it. I wanted to check on you, she said after a brief pause. I heard what happened. Her words caught me off guard. Heard? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. From who? There was another pause, and I imagined her debating whether to tell me the truth. Albert, she admitted. He told me everything. Nathan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to say. The idea of Albert confiding in Eleanor made my stomach turn. He doesn't deserve your sympathy, I said finally, my tone cold. Eleanor sighed. He doesn't have it, she replied. But you do. Nathan, I know my brother, and I know how he justifies things to himself. I can't change what he's done, but if there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know. Her sincerity took me by surprise. Thank you, I said quietly, but I'm not sure what anyone can do at this point. Well, she said after a moment, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. The conversation stuck with me long after it ended. Eleanor's offer of support was unexpected, but it reminded me that not everyone in my life was tainted by betrayal. There were still people I could trust, people who cared about me. That realization was a turning point. I began to shift my focus from what I had lost to what I could rebuild. The house became a project, a symbol of the new life I wanted to create. I repainted the walls, replaced worn-out furniture, and planted a small garden in the backyard. Each task felt like a step forward, a way of reclaiming my identity. But moving on wasn't just about physical changes. I needed closure, a way to confront the lingering anger and pain that still bubbled beneath the surface. I decided to meet with Lila. The decision wasn't an easy one. Part of me wanted to never see her again, to leave the past buried. But I knew that running away wouldn't bring me the peace I needed. I called her and asked to meet at a small cafe in town. She hesitated before agreeing, her voice quiet. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed and her posture tense. Nathan, she said softly when I approached. I nodded, sliding into the seat across from her. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken words. Finally, I broke it. Why? I asked, my voice steady. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. I don't know, she admitted. I wish I had an answer, something that would make sense of all this. But I don't. That's not good enough, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. You destroyed our marriage, Lila. You betrayed me with Albert, of all people. And you can't even tell me why? Her eyes filled with tears. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, "and I'm not asking for it. But please believe me when I say that I never stopped loving you. What I did was selfish and wrong, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to yell, to rage, to demand answers that didn't exist. But instead, I took a deep breath and nodded. "I don't hate you, Lila," I said finally, "but I can't forgive you. Not now, maybe not ever." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I understand," she said. The conversation ended on a somber note, but as I walked away, I felt a sense of relief. Confronting her had been painful, but it had also been necessary. Back at the beach house, I reflected on the meeting. Lila's apology didn't erase the hurt she had caused, but it gave me the closure I needed. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about absolving her of guilt. It was about freeing myself from the anger that had been weighing me down. And so, I let go. The next few weeks were transformative. I found joy in small things. The scent of freshly turned soil in the garden, the sound of seagulls calling in the distance, the warmth of the sun on my skin. I started to imagine a future again, one that wasn't defined by betrayal or loss. And for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. The beach house, once a monument to betrayal, had become my refuge. Over time, I reshaped it into something new, a symbol of resilience, of reclaiming myself. The once oppressive silence now felt like peace, the rhythmic crash of the waves a steady reassurance that life moved forward. Lila and Albert had become shadows of my past. Their betrayal no longer occupied every waking thought. Instead, I focused on building a future, though I wasn't entirely sure what that looked like yet. It wasn't long before the townsfolk began to notice my frequent trips into the village. The small-town charm, which initially felt stifling, grew on me. People waved as I walked past, asked about my projects at the beach house, and shared stories of their own struggles and triumphs. One afternoon, as I browsed the local farmer's market, a woman struck up a conversation with me. "New to town?" she asked, her voice warm and inviting. "Sort of," I replied, smiling. "I've been staying at the beach house up the road." Her eyes lit up. "The old Lathrop place? I always loved that house." She extended her hand. "I'm Claire." "Nathan," I said, shaking her hand. Our conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in months, I felt a spark of something I hadn't realized I missed: connection. Claire was thoughtful and kind, with a quick wit that caught me off guard. By the time I left the market, I found myself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile. We began to see each other more often, first by chance, then by choice. Claire's presence was like a salve for the wounds I thought would never heal. She didn't pry into my past, and I didn't feel the need to explain. Instead, we focused on the present, on moments that felt simple yet profound. Months passed, and the beach house transformed alongside me. The garden I'd planted flourished, its vibrant blooms a testament to growth and renewal. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years, inspired by the endless beauty of the ocean and the sunsets that bathed the world in gold. Claire became a regular visitor, her laughter filling the once empty rooms. We cooked together, shared stories, and spent long evenings on the porch, watching the waves under a blanket of stars. One evening, as we sat with glasses of wine in hand, she turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. I paused, considering her question. "I did at first," I admitted. "But now, it feels like home." She smiled, reaching for my hand. "I'm glad," she said softly. The years that followed were nothing short of transformative. Claire and I grew closer, building a life together that was rooted in trust and shared dreams. We traveled, explored new places, and made memories that filled the empty spaces left by the past. Lila and Albert remained in the periphery of my thoughts, occasional reminders of the lessons I had learned. Forgiveness had come, not for their sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger would have only held me back, and I refused to let them have that power over me. One day, I received a letter that would change everything. It was from Eleanor, Albert's sister. "Dear Nathan, I'm writing to inform you of my mother's passing. She always spoke highly of you, and wanted you to know how much she valued your kindness and integrity. In her will, she left a portion of her estate to you, a token of her appreciation for the man you are. I hope this brings some light into your life. You deserve it. Warm regards, Eleanor, ****. I stared at the letter in disbelief, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions. The inheritance wasn't just about money. It was a symbol of something much deeper. It was validation that despite everything, I had remained true to myself. The inheritance allowed me to expand my dreams. Claire and I opened an art gallery in the village, showcasing local talent and creating a space where the community could come together. It became a place of joy and inspiration, a reflection of the life we had built. The beach house, once a source of pain, had become the foundation of my new life. It stood as a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there was always the possibility of starting over. As I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Claire joined me, slipping her hand into mine. "This is everything I never knew I needed," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "It's everything we built together," she replied. And in that moment, I knew I had finally come home.